Hello and welcome to another episode of The Beckoning Arm, where we continue our journey into the strange, the mysterious and the paranormal. I'm Paul Fegan, and each episode I'll be interviewing people about their own encounters with the unexplained, and it's with a very open mind that I'll be listening to their tales. I hope you can find a little time in your day to listen along with me. Episode 2, Part 2. The Child Who Remembered the Before. In Part 1, we heard from Essex-born Johanna, who now lives in Arklow, Ireland. Johanna and her husband Tony have 2 children, Lottie and Evie. At the age of just 2 years, Lottie began speaking of past lives and even the time between lives. In Part 2, we continue that journey to see how this story progresses and to find out where it ends. I began by asking Johanna if she tested the water, if she asked further questions to try and uncover weaknesses in Lottie's story and discover if this vat of claims held any water.
Yes, I actually challenged her directly once by telling her that I thought the past lives that she was telling me about must be some sort of game she was playing. And she became very upset, very offended, and strongly denied it.
And how old is she at this? She's 2 at this stage, is she? Or
she was 4.
She was 4 at this stage.
Yeah. And I wondered if she would claim that any kind of role-playing game was real. So once when I saw her just making up a game and I asked her if it was just pretend, and she said yes. So it wasn't, she was definitely differentiating between what was made up and play
and what she believed
were her original memories. So I tested her again on another occasion, and I asked her to actually invent a past life and tell me about it.
That's a very good question. Wow.
Because I wanted to see if she could come up with one that was just as plausible. So she remembered a life where she was a princess living in a castle with a dragon. And the castle was full of buttons that you could press, and it would make anything that you wanted appear if you pressed the button. And her description of the dragon's colour kept kind of randomly changing on a whim. And then she said that the castle had ghosts in it. And then she stopped calling it a castle and started calling it a haunted mansion. And she described things that were in the castle were living, jumping jelly beans and flowers with faces in the garden.
Okay, this is a brilliant baseline test, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
Because everything about this pretty much is fantastical.
Exactly,
and very easily dismissed. And then the fact that she's changing details.
That's right, yeah. The details were changing almost on a second-by-second basis, And she, this princess character was not fleshed out at all. There was no mention of her name, her age, her occupation, how she died. None of the same information that she'd given for Daisy,
Yeah. That's a brilliant test.
So I was kind of satisfied. I was thinking that's more like her imagination at work,
So now you know what it sounds like when she's making stuff up.
That's right, yeah. And it really sort of contrasted with her saying that she'd died because she hadn't eaten anything, and that she died at 30, so she didn't even have a long life. It sounds like she had a difficult life, working with her hands. I just thought, contrast that with her saying that she was a princess in a castle. Yeah, so it was really kind of night and day. And that really sort of helped to sort of satisfy me that, the things that she'd come out with that were more credible really had a very different sort of vibe about it,
I've a battle going on in my mind, a battle between being a believer and being a skeptic. Nothing Johanna is telling me is giving me any reason to camp on the skeptic side of that battle line. She's put Lottie's imagination to the test, and the results are pretty normal. When we lie or are playing make-believe, we change our story We don't keep track of all the details. We trip ourselves up. The truth will out, as it were. There appears to be a stark difference between the stories Lottie knows are fictional and the ones she offers as facts. I find this remarkable. Even authors writing fiction have to maintain pages and pages of notes so that they can keep track of their own imaginative stories. And doubtless they need to reference these regularly while writing, and probably still fall foul of passages that conflict with previous writings. We have to remind ourselves that Lottie is only between the ages of 2 and 6 when she makes all of these claims, and when she does so, they don't appear to have the hallmarks of fabrications. But there's still no absolute proof that any of this is true, and Lottie now speaks to her mother about this. And it brings them on to a much broader topic.
So, when she was nearly 6, she spontaneously started talking about past lives again. This was the final time that she mentioned them. And she brought it up by asking me if it was silly to believe in something if there isn't any proof. So we had a discussion about that, and I used a belief in God as an example. I said some people believe in God with no proof and other people wouldn't. And she said, when I was Daisy, I believed in God. So I was interested that she brought up Daisy again by name, because this was useful for me, because now I knew which life she was talking about.
This is also nearly 4 years after she first...
Yeah,
three
that's
and a half
right.
years after she first mentioned Daisy.
Yeah.
Which is a long time
It's
for
a
a
long
child.
time.
Like, to me and you, 4.5 years or 3.5 years is nothing. But to a child, like from 2 to 6 is just colossal.
Yeah.
Like,
And again, if this was some sort of game she was playing, there was no other sense that she had ongoing storylines like this in general in her imaginative play. Like, this was very unique.
I find this interesting. Lottie is being raised in a non-religious household, so I'd almost expect her to say, therefore, that Daisy didn't believe in God. And then we might think that a little suspect. I'm no historian, but it's probably likely that most labourers in the 18th century did believe in God. However, as with the red apples, green apples comment in part 1, Lottie demonstrates that she doesn't share the same behaviours as the people she claims to have been in past lives. Here, she says without any apparent doubt that Daisy Robinson believed in God. And she doesn't refrain from elaborating either.
So she said that when she was Daisy, she believed in God. And she said because she remembered going to church. She said the church was a big place and people used to go there to pray. So I said, I wonder why you used to believe in God but don't now. And this blew me away. She said, because I'm a different person now. I said, well, I just thought that maybe you had the same personality as Daisy had. She said, no, this is a different life, a different body. So I said, how come you can have a different personality now, but used to be Daisy? And she said, because the personality is gone, but the person is still there.
Oh my God. So this suggests that personality doesn't follow us.
Yeah, so I was absolutely blown away by that. And I said, you mean that a person and a personality are two different things? She said, yes. So she's saying that we have each life, you kind of have a separate personality, but there's some sort of core essence, which she is referring to as the person, that is constant.
That the personality kind of fits onto that when you're a given person.
Yeah.
When you move on to another person, there's another personality.
It's a different personality, yeah.
It kind of scuppers a lot of purported hauntings where someone has a grudge, that, in the afterlife, it's like, how would they still have a grudge if their personality is gone, Although maybe not. Maybe the person, I don't know. Or maybe those people don't shed their personality. Maybe that's part of the problem. It's an interesting one. That's really interesting.
Yeah, so this was another thing that just completely through me.
I'm thinking about the complexity of this coming from a 5-year-old. The personality is gone, but the person is still there. Is this an allusion to the soul, the life force that lives on after human death, and how it might be separate from what personality we take on once we're conceived, which might suggest some physical influence our human bodies have on what becomes our personalities? That when we're born, our souls are viewed through the prism of our physical brains and brain chemistry, what perhaps ultimately gives rise to our diverse personalities. It's an interesting thought. So, if Lottie can speak about the worship of God, or the absence of it, can she say anything of the concept of a supreme being?
She was very careful about not saying anything about the existence of God. I actually questioned her directly on several occasions, just asking her outright, is there a God? And she would avoid the question and change the subject every time, until one point where I was kind of bullying her into it, I guess, who said, is there a God? And she sighed and looked away and she said, it's not like people think.
Okay, please tell me you said, elaborate, my dear.
No, she wouldn't say anything else on it. That's all she said. And that there's some sort of sense that we're just getting it wrong, but it's almost like she couldn't talk about it. It's almost like she felt pressure to not talk about it, almost.
And do you feel that she was talking about God is not what people think, or that afterlife is not what people think?
Well, exactly.
So you don't know.
No, it was so carefully worded as to be.
She was shutting you down, though.
Yes.
She was being ambiguous.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But she was shutting
completely.
You down as well.
Yeah.
This is all you're getting. Don't ask me any more of it.
Yeah. It's almost like she almost considered maybe that I wouldn't understand. It was dismissive. Wow. It was kind of, it's not like people think. She had this sense of, we've completely got the wrong end of the stick down here.
Wow, down here. Jesus. Well, she did say she was floating, so
yeah, exactly.
It is literally down here.
So she was talking about how in the past people were killed if they didn't believe in God. So she was saying that she thought that people might say they believed in God when they didn't, just to avoid being killed. This
was something that was happening in a past life that she experienced, was it? That she witnessed?
I assume so, yeah.
Wow, what a thing to say, because that's factual. We know that that's true.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. But she said that she felt, as Daisy, she really did believe in God.
An interesting response. She doesn't nail her colours to the mast here. She doesn't categorically say whether or not God exists. But she doesn't evade the question entirely either. And is it just possible that if God does exist, and if reincarnation is a thing, perhaps souls are inhibited in terms of what they can speak about, the way a speed limiter might prevent a car from going too fast? We veer away from the deeper philosophical questions for a bit, and Lottie is asked about where Daisy Robinson lives. This also provides Johanna an opportunity for more testing.
I asked her if she lived in a big city when she was in England, and she said she lived in a little town. So with fingers crossed, I said, do you remember the name of it? She said no. And she confirmed that it was in England. I asked her what the capital city was called. This is all more testing. And she said she didn't know, she didn't live there. She just lived in a little town. And she said most people around lived in little villages where everybody knew each other. There were a few shops. You could buy bread, cheese, and meat. So then, more testing, I said to her, in all seriousness, and was there a McDonald's in the town? She laughed and she said, no, that wasn't invented yet.
Oh my God. That's fascinating. She said it hadn't been invented.
It hadn't been invented yet. So I pushed her, are you sure? Because I was trying to get her to just agree with me. And she said, yes, we didn't even have cars, only horses.
What the hell?
So she wouldn't be fooled. She wasn't falling for my attempts to throw her off.
Catch her out.
Yeah.
And did she allude to everyday life, what they ate or drank or what they worked at?
Well, she, apart from saying that she made blankets with the wool that she sheared, and then she said that there were food shops in the town, she remembered. Bread and cheese and meat being sold.
Wow.
And that everyone got around on horses. I thought her little bit of information about how everyone knew each other in the village was interesting as well, because I was thinking about like the church community that she would have been a part of.
And when you were in Switzerland, or no, I suppose you would have been in Ireland by now, by the time she's nearly 6. No?
We, after we lived in Switzerland, we moved to Australia. So that's where...
Oh, okay. And
Australia was where she had the memories from when she was 4 and 5.
I see. And were you in a small community in Australia where everyone knew each other?
No, we were in a city.
Okay. So this is what I love about this story. At every point where you just go, well, I could, tick it off as being, it's probably because she's experienced this, that or the other.
Yeah.
Then something gets in the way like that and you go, no, that doesn't make sense either. I'm sure a real hardcore skeptic would have a field day, and that's fair enough, that's they do. But I think this is... it stands up to a certain level of scrutiny, that's for sure.
It does. And I was trying to catch her out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, clearly.
But she just wasn't falling for it.
It would have been fascinating to hear a town being mentioned. What does it mean that Lottie knows the name of neither the town nor the capital city? Could it be simply because she doesn't remember absolutely everything about Daisy? That memories fade over the centuries and the lives lived the way memories fade in her own lives. She alluded to a quite insular life in small communities, and this piqued my interest. How far would you have to go back in your own country for people to have been born, to have lived their whole lives and died in one small town or village? 30 years? 50? 100? Sure, it happens today, but you could live on a remote island nowadays and still be very educated about the wider world. But 100 years ago, if you lived in a small town or village your whole life, you might not have known a huge amount about the rest of the world, bar what you learned in school or read in newspapers. And certainly in 1787, when labour was more important to the household than a state education, your entire world could be defined by the limited boundaries of the place where you lived. But the testing of Lottie's claims goes on, and this time it gets very specific.
So I asked her if she remembered anything else at all. She said she remembered the money had the king on it. I asked her what the money looked like and if it was paper money, and she said, no, there wasn't such thing as paper notes, only coins. So this was information that I didn't know myself. I had no idea about sort of the history of money.
So what happened? So she says she used coins with the king on it.
That's right. So I asked her if she could describe the coins, what they looked like. She said they were bumpy on the edges. And I said, what do you mean bumpy, like bashed about? Because I was thinking, perhaps hammered coins were used then. And she said, no, they were... She couldn't think of another word, so she just said bumpy again. And I said, do you mean like raised or ridged around the edge? And she said, yes. So I asked her how she knew all this, and she said, I don't know. I said, this was more testing. I said, have you heard it somewhere? Have you been learning history at school? And she was pretty incredulous, and she said, impossible. I said, what do you mean? And she said that in her year at school, they didn't learn history yet. That was only for the older children. So and I knew that was the case. That was the case. So
that was that crossed off.
Yeah, that's right. So I decided to do some research into what she'd said about the coins. So first of all, she was correct about there being a king on the throne. It was King George III, and he reigned from 1760 to 1820. Banknotes didn't become legal tender in England until 1833. So,
oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh,
so that's when they first became legal tender. And then it was about 20 years after that they first started being printed, because before that they were hand-drawn.
Yeah.
And even though there were £5 notes, hand-drawn ones around in sort of the 1790s, it would have been very rare for the working classes to ever see them. And we would assume Daisy was working class based on her
descriptions of her village and what she did for a living.
Exactly, yeah. So then I investigated what Lottie had meant by coins being bumpy around the edges, and I discovered that they weren't made in the hammered method anymore, but they were being milled, which meant that they were made with serrated edges to prevent people from removing the precious metals. And that caused bumps around the edge as opposed to them being smooth, which is what they'd been previously. So I was curious as to whether she would actually recognise any coins from back then. So I found a web page that had a huge variety of coins. There were 52 coins in all. And they sort of ranged back to sort of like ancient Celtic coins all the way up to modern English coinage. And I thought there might be a slim chance that she would recognise a coin. So she looked through all the coins. I asked her if any of them were familiar. She immediately dismissed all the hammered coins. And she dismissed all the modern coins as well. But she took more interest in the coins that were from the right sort of time period. Exactly.
Oh, wow.
So I showed her, I was just scrolling through without sort of any prompting. She came across the milled coins and she pointed to the dots around the edge and said that that's what she'd meant by bumpy. So that confirmed that that's what she'd been talking about. Then she immediately pointed to a George III shilling from 1787 and said she strongly recognised that coin. And she recognised the picture of the king on it.
Do you get a sense at all that she can, just to eliminate this, that she can read any text on the coin? That, you know, she'd go, oh, well, Mummy said George III. Well, you hadn't suggested any particular era.
No, I hadn't said to her about George III or anything like that. And the names of the kings on the coins are written in Latin. So she wouldn't have been able to just read it.
So she points out a George III coin. She recognises the king's
She said she strongly recognised that coin, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Are you, like, at this point, did you get chills at this point? Like,
yeah,
you thinking...
I was really surprised because I'm not sure if you'd have showed me the same coins and said which coins were from the 1780s. Well, I wouldn't have a clue. I wouldn't have had, you know, it would have been a guess.
It would have been a guess. And what are the odds? What are the odds? I mean, how many coins were on this selection?
There were 52.
52 coins. So what are the odds? You know, 1 in 52.
Yeah. Yeah.
And did she just pick out one?
Well, I would have been impressed if she'd just picked out one, but she went on. She looked through the rest of the coins and pointed out a George III spade guinea from 1793 and a George III farthing from 1799, which she described as being vaguely familiar, and a Somerset Bristol halfpenny token from 1793, which she said that she remembers seeing before.
Now, originally we heard the year 1787 being mentioned, right?
That's right, yeah.
But that's not when she died. That was just a year she remembered being around, or was that the year she was born, Daisy?
Well, we're not sure if that date has any particular importance for Daisy.
Okay, so it could have been in the middle of her life.
It could have been, yeah.
Okay, so it's not that, you know, so it's conceivable that this Daisy Robinson person, if she existed, would have been around in the late 1790s and would have used these coins as well.
Yeah.
So that's another 3 coins? Is that 4 coins now?
That's 4 coins in all that she pointed out from that were all George III. Yeah.
And were there any misfires where she kind of pointed out something and you went, oh, that's Viking?
No.
Like, I know you said she ruled out the hammered coins and ruled out the modern ones.
Yeah.
Did she get anything wrong?
She didn't get anything wrong, no.
So, I mean, what are the odds of picking one coin, right? That's correct. But then 2 coins that are correct. But then 3, it gets harder because the more you're picking out, if you're guessing, the more the chance increases that, statistically you're going to pick a wrong coin at some point.
Yeah, that's right.
But to get 4 in a row that are correct, that's like, what are you thinking at this stage? I mean, what are you and Tony thinking at this stage?
Yeah, we couldn't believe the odds of her being able to do that.
Like, I know you're agnostic about this, but are you able to dismiss that?
We struggled to dismiss it. Her dad was saying that the chances of her doing that just off guesswork would have been pretty fantastic.
So what's your conclusion on that? Like, on just that alone? I mean, if she had said nothing else, bar, I was around in, the 1780s period, roughly, and we use these coins, I'm going to pick them out for you. If she said just that, that'd be mind-blowing
in itself.
It's a mind-blowing detail in the whole story, but then coupled with everything else.
Yeah. And I never would have thought when she first started talking about her past lives that she would be able to back it up with evidence.
And if it was a fertile imagination, you'd almost think that it would just get better and better, the imagination. But it goes off a cliff. It just after 6, it's gone. Like, these details, these claims, these stories, they just stop.
Yeah, they just stop. And apparently that's fairly typical for children. They often forget before the age of 10 that they ever spoke about past lives.
Yeah, I think what's lovely about it is, though, that you and Tony didn't dismiss her. Like, you were obviously intrigued. You were the opposite. You wanted to hear more. But I think it's great that you didn't dismiss her. You didn't stop her in her tracks and say, well, that's... you asked probing, sceptical questions like the one about McDonald's or whatever, just to see if she would bite, and then you'd know, well, God love her, she's only a kid, you'd forgive her for that. But, the fact that you didn't just dismiss her out of hand and listened to her is probably why it went on as long as it did. If you'd been more dismissive of it, she probably would have clammed up at age 2.
Yeah, that's right.
So it's an interesting one, isn't it? That maybe there is truth in, as I was saying, in Hulda Folk 102, they were saying we teach it out of children. We dismiss their claims.
Yeah.
Maybe we shouldn't.
That's right. I've heard that even sometimes when a child will say that they used to have a different mum and dad, that the current mum and dad can feel offended by that and tell them to stop saying that. And that can make children clam up straight away.
That's quite remarkable. I would have considered that to be a really difficult test. Imagine if you were lying about something, anything, and someone presented you with 50 plus items, and the veracity of your claim hung on your ability to pick out the 4 correct items in that list that would corroborate your story. It's not impossible, but it's highly unlikely you'd succeed. And yet, Lottie does. I feel like I have one foot in the believer's camp, and I'm now inexorably dragging the remaining foot across 2. It's difficult to be cynical in light of such test results. Now, if we accept the notion that someone might live multiple lives, and we also accept the claim that some, like Lottie, remember them, we must also consider that they have lived the various stages of life over and over again. I'm wondering if there was ever any evidence of Lottie becoming jaded with the process.
So this was the first year of her life, possibly the first 8 months. Whenever she saw her own reflection in a mirror, she would cry and look away. And we kind of noticed that she was doing this and wondered if she just didn't like the look of babies. So when she was around other babies, she looked at them fine. She didn't cry. She engaged normally with them. But it was only her own reflection when we showed her. She would just start crying and turn her head away and bury her head into your shoulder as if extremely upset.
Okay, and so, I mean, I suppose you just think she doesn't like her image in the mirror
Yes,
for whatever reason.
A strange reaction, but that did seem to be what was happening.
And did that then just stop, or did it keep going on?
So it wore off eventually as she grew. She was a very frustrated baby. We always got the impression from her that she couldn't wait to grow up. And as soon as she learned how to talk, that is essentially what she told us, that she can't wait to be a grown-up. She's looked forward her whole life to getting childhood over and done with, and being an adult.
Done with? I mean, that's only something you'd imagine saying if you'd done it before.
Yes.
I mean, because how would you know what you're getting over and done with if you'd never done it before?
Yeah.
You'd have to have some concept of what it's like to be a baby.
Yeah, that's right.
Which we don't expect babies to have.
No.
It's like, this is a new experience for me. You know, every day is a new experience. Every age is a new experience. But you got the impression maybe it wasn't, or at least she was feeling it wasn't.
Yeah, that's right. And so we didn't really know how to interpret her reaction to the mirror as a newborn. But after she started talking about past lives, we kind of drew our own conclusions that, she's frustrated about being reset as a baby and having to go through babyhood, childhood again.
But she said it as well. She said
it as well, yeah, that she wants to get out of childhood, become an adult, get on with life. She's always seen childhood as being kind of a phase where she's being held back.
And did that, beyond 6, did she say that? Like,
Yeah, she said that her whole life, yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And is that the only thing that remained from all of this, unusual behaviour and claims and everything else? Is that the only thing that remained after 6? Just apart from the fact she was comfortable with dying, the concept of dying, is that the only other thing that remained? Which is basically that she was going, oh, bloody hell, I'm 7, or bloody hell, I'm 8. I can't wait to be 20 or whatever.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
And does she still feel that? She's 17 now. She still feels that.
She can't wait to grow up, get out of the house, stand on her own 2 feet.
Wow. I mean, there's lots of confident kids who, they can't wait to fly the nest and make their own way in life. That's not unusual in and of itself, but given the context of this, it's different because it stayed with her since those very early days.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And so obviously she's forgotten about all of this now. What do you, looking back on it now, what do you and Tony make of it?
Well, I think I still make of it now what I made of it then, which is that there's definitely something to it. There's something more to what we think we know.
100%, because we don't know everything. There's so much we don't know. There's so much we don't know.
No, and I'd be very tempted to believe that our consciousness is separate to our physical brains, and that somehow it can survive and kind of reattach to a different physical body.
And I mean, you said you're not religious or anything, but...
No, I'm not religious.
Yeah. So, I mean, up to this point, you would have been an atheist, presumably.
Yep.
And maybe you felt that, when people die, that's the end, it's game over. Richard Dawkins type. Yeah. And so it has shaken to some degree. I'm not saying you don't feel that way anymore, but it has possibly shaken the foundations of that belief.
Yeah, I think hearing it from children is different to hearing it from adults, because adults have got kind of set beliefs and set agendas, and children don't. So why would children have these memories, have these experiences, that they want to share with us, I don't see how or why that would happen unless it was based on some sort of genuine memories.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with you. I mean, even if we go down the road of saying that, oh, well, this was a very fertile imagination, it still doesn't explain how she knew things.
That's right, yeah.
As I mentioned in the introduction, Lottie has a younger sister, Evie. So it begs the question, did she ever speak about past lives?
So her sister is 2 years younger than her. So after Lottie came out with these memories, I was kind of waiting,
bracing yourself
with my notebook and pen, waiting for Evie to come out with memories. She never did. So at one stage, I just thought, well, I'll ask her directly and see if that would just awaken a memory. I said, who were you before you were Evie? She had no idea what I was talking about.
Wow, so it's like chalk and cheese, just totally. And that's the normal response you would expect.
Yes,
I mean,
that's
if you ask, 1,000 kids that question, that's what you would expect from 999 of them at least. Probably 1,000 of them, is them to say that.
So I sort of introduced the idea that maybe, we've been different people before the people that we are now. But she had no concept of that being a reality, and she came out with no memories.
So somehow, let's just suspend our disbelief and just say this is real. What Lottie remembers is real and it's all factual and that. So somehow there was a glitch in the matrix and she remembered it and Evie didn't. Evie, like all of us, most of us, didn't.
Yeah.
And Lottie did. And is there anything in your or Tony's history, unusual, like mediumship or anything at all that would suggest that, there's some sort of, that this has happened before with somebody else in the family, or has anyone got, second sight, I say in air quotes, is there anything at all that would suggest?
No, we don't know of anyone else who has experienced this.
Practiced mediumship or anything like that?
No, nothing like that. The only thing that I can say, the difference between Lottie and Evie is that in this life, Lottie has a fantastic memory.
Really?
So,
like photographic or?
Not photographic necessarily, but her memories for things are extremely good. So I'm not surprised that out of the pair of them, it's Lottie that can remember back to the 1700s.
Yeah, okay. So that brilliant memory has remained intact all down through the centuries.
Yeah. And that does make me wonder if that's part of the core person that she mentioned, about how the person and the personality are different. Perhaps the fact that she's got such a good memory,
whatever soul she is,
part of her core person.
Yeah, that supersedes personality.
Yeah.
Was there anything unusual about the pregnancy or the birth or anything at all that you can remember? There was nothing strange that happened or anything that you didn't have I mean, I'm clutching at straws here, but I'm kind of thinking, well, where did this start? If this is real, where did it start? What was it triggered by? Were there any signs of it really early on? And I mean, before birth, there was nothing unusual about the pregnancy or the birth or anything.
No, nothing.
And you didn't have any hint until, what was he said, 8 months or something like that. That was the first thing. She was crying.
When she was crying, when she looked in the mirror, and of course we didn't know what to connect that to. And of course,
there's probably lots of children who would do that. That in and of itself is not particularly, unusual or anything like that. It's just in the context of what we know came after.
That's right.
That it becomes, and then of what she said, about just wanting to be an adult.
Yeah, it
God
makes a lot of sense.
Adults. Being an adult sucks. It's crap. I wish I was a kid. I'm the opposite. Except for I have a crap memory in this life and I have a crap memory of previous lives if I lived them. So Johanna didn't note anything unusual during her pregnancy with Lottie. But as with everything to do with this story, there's more to this.
Well, there wasn't anything unusual at the time, but I did find out from Lottie when she was 3 that she had memories of being in my womb. So I decided to ask her about this, because it makes sense if she could remember past lives and she can remember time between lives. It makes sense that she would also remember before she was born. So she had her head resting on my chest and she said, "What's that noise?" I said, "Is it a sort of beating sound like a drum?" She said, "Yes." I said, "That's my heart beating." So this is what started the conversation. I said, "Have you heard that sound before?" She went, "Yes." I said, "Where were you when you could hear that?" She said, "I was curled up in a ball. I could hear something." So I said, "What could you hear?" She said, "Someone talking." So I said, "Who was talking?" And she said, "It was you. I could hear your voice and Daddy's voice." I said, "Wow. Did you eat anything in there?" She said, "No, just drank water." And I asked her, "How did you do that?" And she said, "By slurping it." And she pursed her lips and sucked in. I said, "Could you see things in there? Was it really bright in there?" Again, this is me testing her.
Yeah.
She said, "No, it was dark." So I said, "Did you have any toys to play with?" She said, "No, I was holding something." Then she kind of looked thoughtful and she said, "Was I holding your bones?" I said, "I don't know. Were you?" She said, "It was long, sort of curly, straight. It was thin and round. It felt like a rubber ball, but it wasn't a ball." I said, "How did you feel when you were in my tummy?" She said, "Good." And I said, "What did it feel like in there?" She said, "A bit like skin, a bit tickly and scratchy. I was uncomfortable and comfortable." She also said that she remembered sleeping in there. And I asked her what else she did in there. And she said, nothing really.
Oh, how old was she at this stage?
She was 3.
Wow.
When she was 4, she had a few more things to say about her memories from my womb as well. We asked her if she was comfortable in there, and she said, "Yes, the thing I remember about being in Mummy's tummy was that it was nice and warm." I said, "Did you ever feel cold in there?" She said, "No." And I said, "Did it ever get too hot?" She said, "No." Again, more testing. I said, "Was it too hot sometimes?" I was really pressing for her to give an inaccurate answer. She said, "No, it was warm all the time." I said, "What else do you remember about it?" She said, "I remember that thing I was holding was orange." I said, "But how could you see what colours things were if it was dark?" She said, "Well, when it was a bright and sunny day outside, it was a bit brighter in there. And when it was a cloudy day, it was dark. It was very, very soft and comfortable in there for me. I loved it so much." So I asked her, "Was it uncomfortable at all?" She said, "Sometimes it was. I didn't have enough space." I said, "What shape were you in there? Like, what shape was your body in? Were you all stretched out like this?" And I just stretched out my arms and legs. She said, "No, I was in a ball." I said, "Show me." And she brought her arms and legs in close to her body and tucked her head right in.
Classic fetal position.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. I said to her, "Did you ever stretch out?" And she said, "I did try to, but I didn't really have enough space. I wanted to stretch out. I used to think about how lovely it would be to stretch out."
My God.
She said, "I could stretch out this big," and she extended her arms and legs a small amount, but with like her elbows and knees still bent. I said, "Could you feel anything against your hands and feet when you did that?" She said, "They touched a thing. It was really wide and long and big." I said, "Was it soft or hard?" And she said, "It was soft and squidgy." I said, "Were you bored in there?" She said, "Yes, I was bored. Very bored. I didn't do anything. I think I did used to smile in your tummy and frown. Maybe I was grumpy." I said, "What made you grumpy when you were in my tummy?" She said, the light coming in when I wanted to sleep. I liked it dark to sleep. I said, oh, I see. What colour was the light coming in? She said, it was sort of light and dark. It was whitey orange. So that was what she described about the memories.
It's fascinating that she said that it was brighter when it was sunny outside.
Yes, that's right.
You'd have to have a concept of what a sunny day is like. And that of the concept of even the sun and clouds to say that. Like, I know she was 3 recalling this, but she's inferring that she thought this at the time. Mm-hmm. But that again feeds into the past life thing, because she'd have to have a concept of, oh, that's the sunshine. It's sunny now. She can't see outside your tummy.
No. And she had a concept of feeling bored.
Bored?
Even though she didn't... If this was her first life, she'd never experienced doing anything anyway.
And that's an interesting fact. Do babies slurp amniotic fluid while they're in there? They do?
They do drink, yeah. Yeah.
And is there a purpose to that? Because I know they're fed through the umbilical cord. So is there
that's
a purpose?
Right. So they get nutrients and oxygen through the umbilical cord, but they can drink the amniotic fluid, yeah.
And is that of is it just something they do and it doesn't harm them? Or is it that it's something they do because they need what's in it?
That I'm not sure about.
Okay, that's interesting. I never knew that.
Yeah. Yeah. So
I mean, what an extraordinary childhood. I mean, this is off the charts.
So there were a couple of things that we could verify from her time in the womb. When she was born, the midwives were amazed at how long she was. So she was nearly 59 centimetres long when she was born. And that's longer than 99% of babies.
It's just under 2 feet, actually, isn't it? Yeah, because it's 30 centimetres in a foot.
Yeah. And after she was born, she would stretch every few seconds. So she would stretch out as much as she could.
As if she was indulging herself.
If she had, been extremely cramped for a long time. And the midwives tried to swaddle her and she would scream. And they said that's very unusual for a baby to not like being bundled up like that. Normally it's comforting to them. But if you tried to restrict her arms and legs in any way, she would scream. Because she just wanted to be allowed
she wanted to be free
to stretch out as much as possible because she'd been so cramped. And the other thing that we could verify is that when I was in labour with her, I had a fetal heart monitor attached to my tummy, and her heart rate went quite dangerously low at one point. And I was like, should I be concerned about that? And the midwife said, oh no, don't worry. That's just when they hold the umbilical cord and they squeeze it and it reduces their oxygen flow and their heart rate goes down and they almost pass out. And at that stage, then they let go of it. So we know that she used to hold the umbilical cord and squeeze it, which sounds like what she was describing when she said that she was holding something that was like long and sort of curly, straight and felt like rubber. So that was another thing that we could confirm, because I'd seen it on the heart monitor that she had been squeezing that.
I don't know what to say, Johanna, really. It's an absolutely fascinating history of a child's first few years. You see, the thing about it for me is there's so much information in there. And there doesn't seem to be, now, you know, you're imparting what you've logged, but there doesn't seem to be anything that contradicts anything or anything that's inaccurate. The historical stuff checks out.
It does, yeah.
You almost get to the point where you go, I just wish she remembered it. You know, I wish she remembered it, because then you could siphon more details. You know what I mean? You could quiz her for more information about it. But it's almost more precious that all of this comes from her first few years, because, like we were saying, you're a little less cynical maybe about children, especially when they're coming up with such detail, because it just seems much more honest. It's not influenced by anything she's learned or seen or picked up along the way.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
An incredible account of being in the womb. Again, this feels very believable to me. If Lottie made it up, she managed to concoct a very plausible story of what we imagine it might be like for a fetus gestating in the womb. But when you think about it, if it's true that Lottie can remember past lives, death, and between lives, it suggests her memory never stopped recording, and therefore it makes perfect sense that she would remember being in her mother's womb. It's almost like we've checked the last few beams of the ship's hull and found them to be watertight. But that's just my summation at the time of producing this podcast. I'm wondering how much interest Dr. Jim Tucker in the US showed, and if he was intrigued enough to document Lottie's case.
He did, yes. He's written a book called Life Before Life, and he wrote the follow-up to that, which was called Return to Life. And he was writing that book at the time that I was in touch with him from the Past Life Forum, and he asked if it would be okay to include Lottie's case as one of the case studies in his book. So
how did you feel about that?
I felt good about it. I really admired his take on collecting the information and kind of looking at it in a scientific way. So I was delighted to be involved in that way. And he was thrilled that I had like actual transcripts of the conversations that I'd had with Lottie. So it wasn't
fair
like...
play to you for having the presence of mind to record it.
It wasn't like I was, not remembering things accurately. So I sent him all the information that I had, and he included Lottie's case of Daisy Robinson in his book, Return to Life.
And did he use her real name or did he change her name?
He changed her name to Olivia. Okay.
And at the time, that's how you felt. Well, she was only small then, probably still. You felt that was the best thing to do.
Yes. He is also quite happy when people agree to use pseudonyms, because he feels like you're not trying to gain fame and fortune from, what the media might say is attention-seeking or...
And just for clarity, we're using real names here. So, and how do you feel about that? I mean, that was the decision you made. I remember asking you about it.
Yeah.
Do you feel like because Lottie's older now and maybe it doesn't matter as much, or...
Yeah, she's older now, so I was able to ask her and get her permission. Her permission.
Yeah, which is great. And what is the doctor's... What's his theory on this?
So, much like me, he has said that he's not a believer necessarily, but he also couldn't in his right mind dismiss all of these cases that he's experienced. And the fact that Lottie's memories were from so long ago is actually quite unusual. A lot of the cases that he looks at, they're from people who were alive in the 20th century who are able to be verified as real people. And the children that he has interviewed can actually recognise members of their previous family who are still alive.
Oh my God. That's another dimension to it. So he must feel that there's something in this. It's not... I mean, that's an interesting dimension to it, that they would recognise people who are still alive.
Yeah, that's right.
So you must feel that there's more to this.
Yeah, I mean, he's dedicating his life to researching it, so...
Wow.
I think he's onto something.
Yeah. We're coming to the end of this fascinating past lives account now. Johanna has spoken at great length about this, and I've tried to give my most honest appraisal of what she said. But there's one voice we haven't heard from. I was genuinely delighted when Johanna told me that Lottie, now aged 17, wanted to come in and have a few words. So I swung the studio doors out to the garden again on a beautiful day in June, and Johanna, Lottie and I sat down to chat. As Johanna stated in the podcast, Lottie no longer remembers any of the past lives she spoke about as a child. But does she remember anything from that time?
I do remember one thing, and that is the when I was shown a bunch of different historical coins.
Okay.
And I have a memory of picking the coins and being surprised when I was correct.
And how did that feel? Like, did you feel you were picking them at random, or did you feel...
I just sort of, I remember picking them sort of instinctively and just pointing like, that one. And then when I was told like, yeah, that's actually from the right era, I was like, oh, okay. How did I know that?
So you're just going on your gut, like...
Yeah.
That's astonishing. And can you remember how you felt when you picked out like one coin correctly and then two and then three?
I suppose it was just sort of like a growing sense of like, how am I doing this?
Okay. But did it mean anything to you at that age? I mean, did you understand why you were doing it, and did it mean anything at all?
I think I had some sort of vague idea that it was like not normal.
Your parents were clapping. Yeah. Achieve, child, achieve.
I was like, okay, well, whatever I'm doing, it seems to be good, I guess.
Okay, yeah. And but you've no recollection whatsoever of talking about past lives, none of that stuff.
No, I don't remember.
Okay, that's fascinating. A nice insight into how Lottie was feeling at the time of this test. And although she seemed to know which coins were the ones she used at the time, her memory of it now is of being surprised that she happened to pick out the right ones. It's almost like, because the memories of all her past lives are gone, so too are the memories of using those coins. She's left with the memory of being able to identify them without any memorable context. The memory of her choosing the right coins remains, but the past lives memories that led to her doing so are no longer accessible. All Lottie really has to go on these days are her mother's records of what Lottie said when she was a toddler. She's heard her own story as though she's a third party listening to someone else's. So what does she make of it all? Does she think her own recollection of past lives might be true?
I'm sort of conflicted on that, because if it hadn't been for like my own saying that, or like, what my parents have told me I've said, I would completely dismiss past lives as a thing. I would not believe in them whatsoever. So now I'm sort of conflicted, because like this sort of thing I would usually not believe in it. Like I do sort of believe in some paranormal stuff, but just not this. I don't know, it's confusing.
Well, it's interesting that Lottie isn't fully on board with this, but it makes sense. She has no recollection of past lives or even mentioning them, so it stands to reason that she might hesitate before committing to the idea. But I'm wondering, has anything survived this period of Lottie's life? Johanna alluded to the fact Lottie had no fear of death at the time and still doesn't. Is there anything else?
Well, yeah, like you said, I don't really, I suppose I don't fear death that much. Like, in terms of other traits, I still have like a great interest in sewing. It's one of my main hobbies.
Wow, really?
So maybe that's left over, I don't know.
But is that from a young age, or is that a recent thing that came back to you, or?
Well, I've always been interested in it, but never really like took it up as a like hobby until maybe 5 years ago. So
okay, and I mean, look, I don't want to clutch at straws here and try and fit pieces together that don't fit, but I am curious, did you feel you took to it like a duck to water? I mean, did it feel like, oh yeah, I used to make blankets in the past life?
I don't know.
Okay, yeah. But you have the interest anyway.
I do, yeah.
It's interesting that Daisy Robinson's alleged job in 1787 was making blankets, and Lottie is now into sewing. But I'm reluctant to read too much into these things. Needlecraft has seen a revival in the past couple of decades, and lots of people enjoy it, so it's not too surprising that Lottie does too. As with her fondness for the song London Bridge is Falling Down, it's interesting in the context of everything else, but also possible that it just comes from this, her present life. There was one other trait that she seemed to have in those early days, being fed up with childhood and wanting to be an adult. Does she still feel this way?
Yep. Even still, I'm 17. I'm still
Really?
just like waiting for adulthood, because I have been basically my entire life always wanted to be an adult, because well, I've always enjoyed like working and stuff, and always wanted to like, I don't know, just have the freedom that adults have, and I just was fed up with being a child and did not I was just waiting, you know?
That's an interesting word to use, isn't it? Like, I'm sure, I'm not a psychologist, but I've been to counselling, and I know that sometimes they use framing, you know, like you use a term to describe something, go, oh, hang on, go back to that word, you know? But you use the word waiting. That's a really interesting word to use, because that does suggest that it's like waiting on a train. It's like, oh, childhood will be over any 20 years now. You know, so, but that's how you felt, yeah?
Yeah, I did feel like that.
And even at the age of 17, you still feel that way, yeah?
Yeah. To be honest, I do. I never felt like I needed to like take my childhood slowly and like savor it. Yeah.
There you go. Uncanny.
When she was a child, Lottie may have been fed up with being a kid because she remembered being through that stage so many times before and just wanted to get on with it. But looking back now, there's a sense that she just looked forward to being an adult and there's nothing unusual about it. Again, she views these feelings through the prism of what she remembers now, and that means without any memories of past lives. I can't help wondering if her reason for wanting to get on with adulthood has shifted over the years because of this. It's all very complex and very strange. And speaking of strange, how does Lottie feel hearing her own story retold to her, the details of which she doesn't recall?
It's a little bit odd, a little bit scary, because I don't know, like, not to say that I would get any sort of attention from this, but it just feels weird that people would be able to know this stuff without me telling them. It's just kind of odd.
And how does it feel? Like, they're talking about things you've said, but like, you have said them, but as far as your memory is concerned, you have no record of it. Does it, like, how did it feel? Like, I know you've only heard part one. At the time of recording this, you've only heard part one because part two hasn't been edited, and of course this is going to be part of it. But how did it feel hearing that podcast? Like, had you heard it in such a consolidated, you know, conversation before? Had you heard it all together? There's a lot of stuff in there to deal with, really, wasn't there?
Yeah, so my mum would, well, obviously mum, you would talk about this a lot during my childhood, like a lot.
She had a lot of notebooks.
So I'd heard all of this before. Still don't know how I feel about it. It's still weird. I believe everything that she's saying because, like, but I trust her. So, like, it's not that I
it's not that you doubt the record.
Yeah, it's just like, okay, I guess I said that.
It's quite strange, isn't it? I mean, we all have snippets of our childhood recalled by parents, siblings, etc. Things that happened in our childhood that we don't remember. But nothing like this. I can imagine how odd that must feel for Lottie. The things she is recorded to have said aren't trivial. They speak to major belief systems. They suggest that we don't die and cease to be for eternity, that we don't necessarily die and go to heaven or hell, but rather that we die and after a hiatus of some sort, our soul inhabits another human form and that this happens over and over again. Reincarnation. But does Lottie herself, in the absence of any memory of claims about it, believe in reincarnation?
Okay, so that's complicated. I suppose I do, because if I didn't, that would kind of contradict myself and my family's experiences. So, I can't really justify that. But so I guess I do.
Okay.
Yes, I have trouble like fully committing to it. Like
Yeah. I think we all do,
fully-
in
yeah.
fairness. I think that's
Yeah.
normal.
Yeah.
I think we all do, yeah.
Yeah, and Lottie's standpoint of finding it to be a bit weird and not really knowing what to make of it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's exactly how me and her dad felt, when we were hearing all these things for the first time.
So nothing's certain. Despite all she's heard about her account of that time, Lottie doesn't see it as irrefutable proof of the reality of reincarnation, and therefore cannot commit to it. In fairness, she seems just as baffled as any of us about this, including her mother. However, while acknowledging how strange this account is, they all seem to take it in their stride. So I asked Johanna if she was ever alarmed during any of this.
Yeah, there were a few moments. So when she said that all the air came out of here and she died, I had no idea how she knew about dying or breathing your last breath or anything like that. So that really shook me up. And then when she was a little bit older and she talked about when she left her body and that she floated up, and I know that that's similar to other people's descriptions of out-of-body experiences, things like that. I had no idea where she would have got this information from or, how she could have spontaneously come up with it.
Yeah, it must be grim to hear your child suddenly speak about death and speak about it in their limited vocabulary. Joanna's disquiet is understandable. And what about Lottie? Is there anything that stresses her out about the things she said?
Kind of all of it. 'Cause like I said, I just have to believe that I said these things, so it's kind of weird when I'm being told like things that I apparently said and I don't have any memory of it. It's weird. So yeah, kind of like most of it, I'm just like, I can't believe I said that.
Yeah, it's true. And like, do any of your friends know about this or?
No.
Okay,
and how do you talk about it?
Okay, and how do you feel about a friend knowing about it? Does it bother you or do you care?
Well, my friends are also very interested in paranormal stuff, so they'd probably have a field day if I told them.
Oh, so captive audience straight away.
Yeah.
And does she think what she said as a child has changed her beliefs in any way?
I think so, yeah.
Do you think you'd be a different person with different beliefs if your mum hadn't told you about this past?
Yes, I might not be so open to the paranormal. I might probably would have turned into one of those people who just dismisses everything, to be honest.
Do you think you have otherwise a fairly scientific mind, would you think?
I think so. I think I need to see or experience things to believe them a lot of the time.
Yeah.
So.
And what an interesting way to end this entire episode. For many of us, we need proof in order to believe in something. But how will we ever find proof of what happens to us after we die? And if we could find proof, what would it look like? Is it just possible that it might look like this, like a child making extraordinary claims about previous lives in a way that seems quite normal to them? Perhaps that's the lure of this topic, that we cannot find proof in a way that is communicable to living humans. So we can ponder the topic without having to commit to anything. With regard to Lottie's case specifically, I absolutely believe in Johanna and Tony's testimony. I believe 100% that Lottie said these things, that she made these claims. The question is, why? Let's say, for example, that this is all nonsense, that Lottie said these things, but none of them have any basis in reality. To my mind, if that's the case, then we still have something to investigate. What neurons would connect in a child's brain to make them conjure up stories and concepts that seem beyond their years and that contain data that is somewhat historically verifiable? It's still utterly fascinating to me. But what if it isn't nonsense? What if it's all true? A fact of nature, part of the cycle of life and death that is as normal as learning to talk, sleeping, aging, etc. Something that every one of us forgets when we're conceived, except a very small few. And because it isn't the norm, whenever they share what they remember, we struggle to believe them and look for other explanations that fit with our worldview. If I'm honest, I'm still agnostic, because how can we ever know for sure about anything in the paranormal? But I will say this: never have I ever heard anything that would bring me this close to believing in reincarnation. And if what Lottie says is true, if it tells of a reality where this current life we're living is just a stage on a journey and it's not the end, then I think it has a profound impact on our sense of who we are, where we've come from, and where we're going. Beckoning Arm was written and produced by me, Paul Fegan, and the sound design was also by me. Music was by purpleplanet.com. Special thanks go out to Johanna and Lottie for taking part in these interviews, and indeed to their family for allowing me to record their story.